In the early days of the church, the gospel of Jesus Christ spread through both triumph and struggle. Two men who played a pivotal role in this mission were Paul and Barnabas. Barnabas, known for his encouragement and trust, saw the potential in Paul, once a fierce persecutor of Christians. Together, they embarked on a mission to spread the message of Christ to the Gentiles, facing miracles, opposition, and personal challenges along the way. Their journey was more than just about spreading Christianity. It was a testament to perseverance, reconciliation, and the transformative power of God's grace. Their story shows how faith, friendship, and trust in God can overcome any obstacle. Join us as we explore the incredible journey of Paul and Barnabas, discovering how their partnership in ministry changed the world and demonstrated the power of God's calling. After Jesus' resurrection and ascension, the early Christian church grew rapidly but faced persecution from both Jewish leaders and Roman authorities. Many believers were scattered, and some, like Stephen, were martyred for their faith. Among the most feared persecutors was Saul of Tarsus, a devout Pharisee who zealously opposed the followers of Jesus. He went from city to city, arresting and imprisoning Christians, even approving the execution of Stephen. However, everything changed when Saul was on his way to Damascus to arrest more believers. A bright light from heaven suddenly blinded him, and he heard a voice saying, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" Trembling and confused, Saul asked, "Who are you, Lord?" The voice responded, "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting." For 3 days, Saul remained blind and did not eat or drink. Then, God sent a disciple named Ananias to pray for him. As Ananias laid hands on him, something like scales fell from Saul's eyes, and he regained his sight. He was immediately baptized and began proclaiming Jesus as the Son of God, Acts 9:17-19. Despite his dramatic conversion, many Christians remained afraid of him. They doubted whether his change of heart was real or just a deception to infiltrate the church. It was Barnabas, a man known for his faith, generosity, and encouragement, who stepped forward to vouch for Saul. Barnabas introduced him to the apostles in Jerusalem, testifying about how Saul had encountered Jesus and was now boldly preaching the gospel. Because of Barnabas's trust and influence, Saul was accepted into the Christian community. Over time, he became known as Paul, and his preaching grew in power. The church in Antioch became a major center for Christian growth, with many Gentiles coming to faith. Acts 11:19-21. Among the leaders in Antioch were Barnabas and Paul, who worked together in teaching and encouraging believers. One day, while they were fasting and praying, the Holy Spirit instructed the church to set apart Paul and Barnabas for a special mission, Acts 13:2-3. They were to take the gospel beyond Judea and spread it to the Gentiles. The church laid hands on them, prayed for them, and sent them off on what would become their first missionary journey. Their first destination was the island of Cyprus, Barnabas's homeland, Acts 13:4-5. They traveled through the island, preaching in Jewish synagogues and proclaiming Jesus as the Messiah. While in Paphos, they encountered a sorcerer named Elymas, who opposed their message and tried to turn the Roman proconsul Sergius Paulus away from the faith. Paul, filled with the Holy Spirit, rebuked Elymas, saying, "You are full of deceit and trickery. You are an enemy of all that is right. Will you not stop perverting the ways of the Lord?" Immediately, Elymas was struck blind, and when the proconsul saw this, he believed in the gospel. From Cyprus, Paul and Barnabas sailed to Perga in Pamphylia. However, at this point, their companion, John Mark, abandoned them and returned to Jerusalem. Paul saw this as a betrayal. while Barnabas, ever the encourager, was more forgiving. Despite this setback, Paul and Barnabas pressed on. They continued to Pisidian Antioch, where they preached in the synagogue. Paul recounted Israel's history leading up to Jesus and proclaimed that through him forgiveness of sins was available. Many Gentiles eagerly embraced the message, but some Jewish leaders grew jealous and stirred up opposition. Eventually, Paul and Barnabas were expelled from the city, but they left behind a growing church, Acts 13:44-52. In Iconium, their preaching led to both great conversions and fierce opposition. Some Jews and Gentiles accepted their message, while others plotted to stone them. Learning of the plot, they fled to Lystra, Acts 14:1-6. In Lystra, Paul healed a man who had been crippled from birth. Seeing this miracle, the amazed crowd believed Paul and Barnabas were gods. They called Barnabas Zeus and Paul Hermes, because Paul was the chief speaker. The priest of Zeus even brought sacrifices to offer to them. Horrified, Paul and Barnabas tore their clothes in distress and pleaded with the people, saying, "We are only men, just like you. Turn from these worthless things to the living God." But soon, the mood of the crowd changed. Jews from Antioch and Iconium arrived and turned the people against Paul. They dragged him outside the city and stoned him, leaving him for dead. Miraculously, Paul survived, got up, and continued his mission. Instead of fleeing, he and Barnabas returned to encourage the believers, strengthening the new churches they had planted. Paul and Barnabas revisited the cities they had preached in, encouraging the believers to remain steadfast despite persecution. They appointed elders in each church and committed them to the Lord in prayer. Eventually, they returned to Antioch, where they reported all that God had done. They rejoiced at how the Gentiles were coming to faith and how God was working through their mission. After some time, a dispute arose in the church about whether Gentile believers needed to follow Jewish laws, such as circumcision, to be saved. Paul and Barnabas traveled to Jerusalem to discuss the matter with the apostles. After much debate, Peter and James affirmed that salvation came through faith in Jesus, not adherence to the law. This decision was a victory for the Gentile believers, bringing great encouragement. However, soon after, Paul and Barnabas had a sharp disagreement over John Mark. Barnabas wanted to give him another chance, believing in his potential, while Paul, still upset over his earlier departure, refused. They could not come to an agreement, and so they parted ways. Barnabas took John Mark and sailed to Cyprus, while Paul chose Silas and continued his missionary work. Despite their separation, both Paul and Barnabas continued to spread the gospel. Barnabas mentored John Mark, who later became a faithful servant in ministry and even wrote the Gospel of Mark, Colossians 4:10. Paul, on the other hand, went on to plant churches across the Roman world and wrote many letters that are now part of the New Testament. Interestingly, later in Paul's letters, he spoke highly of both Barnabas and John Mark, indicating that their relationship was restored. The story of Paul and Barnabas is a powerful testimony of faith, perseverance, and the transformative power of Christ. They faced persecution, performed miracles, and spread the gospel to the Gentiles, leaving a lasting impact on Christianity. Even in their disagreements, God used them to expand His kingdom, showing that despite human differences, His mission will always prevail.